My name is Haley Killian. I am a psychology fellow here at Children's Mercy, and I will let Dr. Park introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Dr. Soyeon Park. I am also a psychology fellow here at Children's Mercy, and we are very happy to be presenting on this topic with you today.
Let's go ahead and get started. We are going to talk about self-care for the caregiver or parent or whatever you refer to yourself as. So the objectives of this presentation are to recognize stress levels related to caring for your child with chronic or complex medical needs, recognize ways to promote your child's self-care skills and set appropriate boundaries, and then finally to identify specific ways to integrate simple self-care skills into an everyday kind of experience. I don't know if that's the right word, but anyway, we'll keep moving. So the first thing I want to cover when we talk about self-care, I think it's important to address that other piece of the self-care kind of dyad is thinking about parental burnout. And parental burnout is an overwhelming feeling of exhaustion related to one's caregiving role and emotionally distancing from one's children. And a sense of parental ineffectiveness, and thinking about this parental burnout. And we know that the increased risk is associated with single parenthood, pre-existing mental health problems, low social supports, female gender, illness complexity, low reported quality of marriage, child emotional behavioral problems, younger children, and lower socioeconomic status. And as this is kind of geared towards our transition age youth, there are things that obviously will apply to some people that may not apply to others. But thinking about how we really conceptualize taking care of ourselves and feeling like we can continue to be productive and supportive of our kids as they reach this transition age, and are really getting ready to do things in a different way. As you have young kids with these complex or chronic medical needs, you really are doing a lot to support them, not only just from a parenting perspective, but from a thinking about all the doctor's appointments and all the things that you have had to kind of put on the front line for so long, and kind of thinking about how that plays a role in your own health and your own well-being, and kind of being the most effective parent or caregiver you can be. And so that's why we start by talking about this parental burnout component. Signs of burnout, worsening physical health, which is why I started to talk about all of those medical appointments that you're doing when your children are younger, and also as they kind of go through the young ages, we kind of neglect our own health and well-being, because our kids are, a huge part of who we are as parents, and from an identity perspective. But also thinking about your impact on emotional well-being and greater perceived stress, right? When there are a lot of things around us that are stressful and overwhelming, we start to feel that even more intensely, which I think many of us have felt throughout the last, even greater sense of stress over the last few years with the collective stress of the pandemic. But hopefully kind of moving towards increasing and reintegrating into some good social supports and those sorts of things. But we will, again, kind of talk about that and kind of move towards that at the end of this presentation. When we think about the transition age youth, and we think about parents and caregivers of these older adolescents, early young adults, we think about this change in roles. How does it look different from when your kid was young and you were learning so much about everything that it means to not only be a parent, but be a parent of a child with a higher level of need than maybe you anticipated. And then less direct control over your child's care, increased anxiety, about those things that you don't have control over that you used to have a lot of control over and responsibility for. Grieving related, excuse me, to needing to care for high needs children, right? Which is what I sort of already alluded to. And then difficulties with replacing caregiver time with personal time. We know that transitions, regardless of what that transition looks like, can be really challenging for people, and try to figure out what does my role look like, and how does my identity kind of shift or change or adapt to these changing needs of these older adolescents and young adults. So obviously this is a recorded presentation, but kind of thinking, taking a moment for yourself to really think about how self-care has been more prevalent of a topic and openly discussed within the last few years, and why is it important to you to be taking some time to view this presentation on your own time, and really think about what that impact is of self-care for yourself. I'll let you take another minute to pause. Feel free to pause the recording, but we will keep moving. And then the other thing, so we just took a minute to think about why this topic is important. But I always encourage parents and caregivers to really take a moment to check in. How am I doing? What are my signs of parental burnout? When do I know that I've reached the crest of my hill of stress and I can't take any more, and how can I really take care of myself at that point? And then think about how you check in with yourself, right? Like, we all have different ways of checking in with ourselves, tuning into ourselves, writing, journaling, drawing. Some people use, meditation, those sorts of things, kind of to turn in. I'm not saying that you have to make this like a 20-minute check-in, but kind of a quick check-in. Or how do I communicate those feelings with others? I'm sure every one of us has had a moment when our stress level or our own life stress kind of gets in the way of relationships and personal relationships, and thinking about how you can even be more effective in not only checking in with yourself, but kind of checking in with the people around you, the people that you have supported or the people that have supported you, or both. And then we think about barriers, right? When we think about lots of activities, what gets in the way of the things that we do? The things that we do that, or don't do, that could be good for ourselves. Lack of motivation is a big one that I hear. It's hard to you get to the end of the day and one more thing, regardless of who that's for, feels really daunting. Difficulty deciding when or what to do for self-care. Difficulty in maintaining self-care. This idea that we have to choose a self-care activity and stick with it forever feels a little daunting, right? And then difficulty integrating self-care across conditions, or not knowing when to seek help. Sometimes life events, the COVID pandemic, interfere with self-care. Lots of people, when I talk to parents and caregivers, they talk about how they really get a lot of joy and fulfillment out of friendships and relationships, and how did that change and adapt and strengthen or weaken throughout the pandemic. And then guilt, right? I can't take care of myself because I have to be doing all of these other things. I can't take 5 minutes, 10 minutes to take care of myself because I have to do 18 other things, and my to-do list is not done for the day, so I can't stop and pause and take a few minutes for myself. So just kind of thinking and reflecting about those barriers for yourself, to try to start to navigate those things. Responsibilities of caregivers. I think I will actually pass this over to Dr. Park to kind of talk about.
Yes. So part of this self-care or caregiver self-care is also about now that my child is older and in more of that kind of transitional phase of their lives, how do I pass that over, some of those responsibilities over to my child? And this is not easy to do because the fact that your child is doing so well in so many different ways is a sign that you have done a really nice job of providing them with all the needs that they have had up to this point. So reflecting on kind of what have I been responsible for throughout my child's life and how do I anticipate these things changing, right? And some of it you will say like, no, it's not really going to change. It's going to stay the same. But there are likely, big areas for some and little areas for others that are going to look different as they enter into an adulthood. Okay. And also reflecting on like, why is this an important part of my own self-care as a caregiver? And part of it kind of goes back to what Dr. Killian was saying of, well, like now that my child is able to do a little bit more, maybe it is a way that I can build and kind of replace what I've been doing for others with a time to do things for myself. Um, and so this doesn't start automatically, right? None of us are born knowing how to make medical appointments or keep track of when medications are supposed to be taken, or knowing how to do the dishes or take care of yourself in other capacities. So it really takes more intentional teaching and kind of learning on your child's part. And it can be overwhelming to start any of those things. So really breaking it down into smaller steps that are manageable. This is something that we're really good about doing when kids are really little, because we kind of say like, okay, this is how much you're able to do. So this is what I'm going to expect. But it becomes harder as kids get older and we start to give a more vague instruction like don't forget to take your medications, but really kind of sitting down with your child, breaking into steps and teaching one step at a time so that they're building confidence. You are also confident that even if you're not the one managing kind of every uh, care needs for your child, that they're going to be okay, and you can trust that some of that responsibility can transfer over really nicely. Um, and we can use a lot of kind of tools to allow those teachings to happen. So if you're anything like me, if I don't write something down, it was never on my to-do list. So using visuals, if that is writing down a list, like I've said, great. If that requires more of a picture kind of a format, something a little bit more concrete, then that's also a great way to remind your child of what their responsibilities are. And of course, we all learn from watching other people do things. So modeling those behaviors, providing a hand over hand support that may be physically guiding your child to complete the task that you're wanting them to do. And we always want to kind of give that vote of confidence. Good job, you're doing it. It's awesome. So that they are getting that feedback of like, okay, I am doing these things and I'm doing a good job of these things. Now, when we think of self-care, is this for anyone, is this kind of what we think of? I think this is often what we kind of hear in the media of what self-care should be. Maybe you've seen this form of self-care posted on Instagram, Facebook, whatever it may be. Now, there's nothing wrong with what's shown in these pictures, and for some, this is kind of how they implement self-care. Maybe not on a daily basis, but at least kind of once in a while, this is what they're wanting to do. But if we think about kind of like, how do I take care of myself day to day, kind of moment to moment, this feels really daunting to be able to go on luxurious trips or to go on, 20-mile runs and meditate for 40 minutes. That may not be a realistic thing, especially if you're kind of new to the self-care game. So really what we're focused on is how do we realistically do this? And the whole kind of point of self-care is how do I recharge? Right? I have given a lot of myself, and how can I fill my own needs? And so it may be as simple as reaching out to friends and family that you haven't had time to do in a while. And maybe that's in between a few meetings in your day, or in between, two different tasks that you're still doing for your child. That's okay. The goal isn't to fill your day with self-care. It's finding the moments that are appropriate for you to actually implement the things that we're talking about. It also may be getting involved with your community. If you're already were part of different kind of groups around your area, in your community, then kind of getting reconnected. If fully reconnecting sounds overwhelming, maybe we take small parts in that and kind of think about what that is. Starting a hobby, right? A very foreign idea to many of us, probably. And at this point, we may be saying, like, what is my hobby? So it can absolutely be a time to explore. Like Dr. Killian was saying, we do not have to commit to one and say, like, this will be my hobby and I will have to do this every single day, because that is not how we find joy in things. Another kind of easy, realistic way to implement self-care is through mindfulness activities. And I say activities more so than kind of meditation, because there are a lot of ways to implement the skills of mindfulness without it being a formal meditation like we saw in the previous picture. And really where I personally am drawn to mindfulness is in these kind of like small ways to include it throughout the day. So kind of the next little bit, I'll discuss some examples. And again, feel free to kind of pause and engage if that feels comfortable for you. There'll be one exercise where I just kind of like walk you through it. Feel free to do it. Even if you're kind of sitting in front of a computer, and we'll go through that. So one of really nice ways to do mindfulness is through informal activities. So these are things that I'm always doing, but how can I implement a little bit of self-care into them? So things like washing dishes, taking a shower, going from your car to your office when you go into work in the morning. Because mindfulness is all about noticing and being really presently aware, a way to check in, if you will. Asking yourself questions like, well, how does the water feel in my hand? How does the soap feel? Is it warm? Is it cold? Does it feel different in different parts of my body? How do I feel when I'm walking? Where is my foot touching the ground? Is there a part that's bugging me? An itch that I didn't notice before? Whatever it may be. So those, and this is just 3 examples of many, many ways you can implement this: driving or cooking or eating. So just a few examples. You can get very creative with this. Now, this is a grounding exercise. Again, very easy to do. And part of why I like mindfulness, we don't have to become a mindfulness guru by any means, but I like it because it requires no preparation. You essentially just need your body in order to do these exercises. So I will actually walk us through this one. And if you feel kind of comfortable where you are, feel free to join in with this exercise. If not, you can always save it for a later time. Okay. So first, start out kind of sitting in a comfortable but a dignified position, whatever that may be for you. For some, it may be more comfortable to stand or to even lay down. So once you're in that position, you may decide to close your eyes after the first one, or you may kind of softly gaze. Now we're going to start with 5 things that you can see. You can just kind of gently look around the room and see what 5 things you can see. It doesn't have to be anything nice, just whatever kind of comes into your view. Next, noticing 4 things that you can touch or feel. It may be where your hands are, maybe how your clothes feel on your body, tightness of your shoes, or your legs are touching your chair. It may even be an itch that you have. There's no need to try and make a sensation happen. We're just simply noticing. Now noticing 3 things you can hear. It may be sounds coming from your house, or it may be coming from outside your house, the humming of your lights or appliances. Now noticing 2 things that you can smell. It may be pleasant or unpleasant, but we're not judging it, we're just noticing. And lastly, 1 thing that you can taste. And it may even be kind of the taste of the air in your mouth. You can certainly pause the video at this point, kind of allow yourself to be in this experience if that's comfortable for you. Or when you're ready, you can kind of readjust your body, give yourself a little stretch, and come back and reorient to this presentation. So hopefully that was a positive experience for most of you. And I just kind of want to really show that like it can be very simple. This is something we can do while we're on a walk, while we're driving. No closing eyes when we're driving, but in lots of different settings without having to prepare for anything. Another way to implement a similar skill is something called a body scan. A really great activity for really checking in with yourself of like, how am I doing? Hi. I don't know if anyone can relate to the experience of having a really long day, coming home from work or, different appointments or whatnot, sitting down finally, and every part of your body just aches, right? And essentially your body's saying like, oh, we have worked really hard today, or I am exhausted. And we didn't notice until that point just because we weren't really allowing ourselves to check in. So this is a good kind of a check-in exercise. Also great to do while you are in bed, ready to go to sleep. If you happen to fall asleep during it, no worries. That's great, kind of connecting with your present moment needs. And essentially, you start from one end of your body to the next, and you go through kind of the different parts of your body to check in and again notice, similar to what we did with the grounding exercise before, and say like, what am I noticing here? What are my needs here? And this also happens to be a really great exercise for those of us who experience a lot of kind of like chronic physical pain. The next one is not an exercise like we have been talking about, but again, a very important resource for many of us, and that is seeking professional support. Because there have been lots of probably team members in your life, lots of providers who have supported your child up to this point, and part of being able to continue to support your child is also having a support for yourself. And so some people might find that having a therapist that they can talk to and check in with may be a good resource. And having a therapist does not mean that you need to lay down and share all your feelings. Often it means learning strategies, learning ways to cope and to manage the difficult areas in your life. So if this is something that sounds interesting to you, then feel free to talk to the social worker on your child's medical team, and they can definitely kind of connect you to providers who may be available, or at least resources that may be available to you. Now that we've got to this point, you kind of survived the presentation. Let's wrap up, or kind of be close to wrapping up, with identifying a self-care goal for you this week. So I kind of think about setting, like, what am I actually able to do or willing to do this week to do a little bit of self-care. So take a moment. Again, you can pause the video at this point and kind of answer these questions, like what specific, first identifying what specific self-care activity you might do, okay, and saying, where would I do it? When would I do it? How long can I do it for? So if realistic what you have is 3 to 5 minutes, great. Can I do that for 3 to 5 minutes? What do I need to prepare in order to do that? So if you decide to read a book, then it's about getting a book that you can read, or downloading a book that you can read. If it's going to be a meditation, maybe it's deciding what that activity is going to be.
I think important to note is that when we think about setting goals and we talk about goal setting, both from a psychology support, but from a making and achieving goals, is to be very specific with them. And so not only saying, okay, I have 5 minutes. When do you have 5 minutes in your day? And thinking about just being really thoughtful about that. I find lots of parents and caregivers that I work with, like, the end of the day is a time when they know that they can take that 5 minutes. And so kind of writing that down into your calendar or your phone or whatever that needs to be, to get you from 0 or 1 or 2, not to say that everyone's starting from 0, but getting you from 0 to 3 days out of 7, or 0 to 1 day out of 7. Kind of starting to build that behavioral momentum.
Absolutely. And then I think the biggest question that maybe we are going to ask is, what are the barriers to doing this, right? And think about, like, realistically what would happen in your day. Of course, there are lots of, like, well, I could use the time to do something different kind of questions that might come to mind, but also, like, realistically think about, like, what might get in the way, and then kind of try and resolve those barriers. So if it is, well, like, it's possible that I may have to pick this child up at that time, then maybe that's not a realistic, that specific goal that Dr. Killian is talking about. Maybe we say, okay, realistically, it's before my kids get up because I know they're not going to get up early, or it's going to have to be this day or at this time, or when I am cooking dinner. And try and just really make it a positive but also realistic goal. Now, the next slide is a video that Dr. Brene Brown, many of us are familiar with her work. It's her TED Talk that she gave. So, and it's a great one if you have not had a chance to listen to it before. So kind of you can find this by literally Googling Dr. Brene Brown TED Talk, right? Like it's kind of that easy to find. So we won't be able to share it in this slide because it is pretty lengthy, but feel free to kind of take additional time. And maybe that can be your self-care, is watching bits of a video. So here are some resources that can guide you in kind of figuring out, especially if you're interested in some of those kind of mindfulness based activities, some starting points for many of you if it's not familiar, and also asking around and kind of seeing, because it is something that a lot of people are using, what works for them. Okay, so feel free to take a screenshot of the slide. But otherwise, this is our presentation. We appreciate you kind of hanging in with us. And we hope that this was a beneficial topic to discuss.